Hi, everybody. This is Addison Seanland at AirInsight, and I'm hanging out with my friend Sean Mendes. Hi, Sean.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Well, still morning for me. It's only 9:05, but okay, it's good. Thank you. I'm well, and we're going to do one of our periodic. We missed a month because of air shows and stuff, but our monthly Africa chat. So I wanted to ask you about your perspective. We've just gone through earnings season in the US, and airlines here are not looking so good. That these giant companies are showing, multi-billion dollars revenue per month, but it's not so profitable anymore. Is it the same? Do you get the same sense across the Africa market that there's a change coming?
No, I don't. In fact, I think it's the exact opposite. I think in Africa, North American airlines have been struggling primarily because their labor costs are now getting out of control. They're doing exactly what they did in the early 2000s, pre 9/11, which was pegging their labor costs to the apex of revenue. And consequently, any downturn makes them vulnerable, to basically an existential shock. We saw how it ended. 9/11 led to, to a whole restructuring of costs and Chapter 11s and so forth. And my guess is you're probably going to see that again. African airlines, for the most part, don't have that luxury. If you're going to wind up with an unsustainable cost structure, you die. And as a result, African airlines, even though they may not be as successful in terms of absolute revenue and absolute profitability as Western airlines in the good times, if you look at airlines like Ethiopian, which also announced their results last week, they've also hit record revenues, but that record revenues has come with record profitability for them. And, I think that's largely a case because they're more disciplined. Certainly, they don't have to deal with unions and collective bargaining and, the Railway Labor Act and all the, and also ALPA, which has been the main culprit in terms of driving US costs up to unsustainable levels, in my view. But as a result, you're seeing, more profitability and more sustainability in that respect because Ethiopian does not have an existential crisis within their cost structure that is looming just at the drop of a war in the Middle East or something else which can crater demand and raise oil prices, which effectively that is all that it could take potentially to drive at least one of the US majors under.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you talk about it, because I think in Europe we're seeing something similar, right? Labor costs are spiking, and Lufthansa has announced that they're getting rid of their 340s, which is the longest root canal in the history of aviation, probably.
Lufthansa loves to announce things like 10 years before they actually do it. If you've been waiting for their new business class and first class product to come out, I think that was announced back in, well, if not the Stone Age, at least in the Jurassic Age or thereabouts. But yeah, that is the reality. But I think the difference again in Europe is the barriers to entry for new entrants in Europe, certainly not at the level of the IAGs or whatever, are a lot lower. You see a lot of scrappy, smaller airlines come in with niches, low cost carriers, are seriously competitive. And I think the European single market's a very different dynamic than the US market, where the barriers to entry are effectively insurmountable at this point because of artificial constraints like 1,500-hour minimums for new pilots and things like that, which would just basically restricts the labor pipeline to the big four or five, and consequently, just makes anything smaller than that feeders to the big guys rather than anything else. So, Africa has had that kind of similar challenges. African airlines have suffered brain drain primarily to the Middle East in the past, but I think there is a quality of life issue which a lot of African pilots are beginning to see, that they can actually have careers back home rather than just jobs back home, and a lot of them are choosing to stay with professional outfits in the home country or near the home country rather than looking at the glory of flying 777s and A380s out of the Middle East, which has always been an option. In fact, has all usually been a target for them in decades past.
Hmm, interesting. So if we look across the African airspace, so to speak, what changes are coming in since the last time we spoke? I noticed, for example, there's rumbles about Qatar buying a stake in Airlink in South Africa, which does, I have like qualms about that. What's your sense of that?
That's a very good question. And, I've been skeptical about anything Qatar says as well. As you were saying, Lufthansa takes forever to do it. Qatar is in a similar position. They announced their investment in Rwanda and the new airport in Rwanda, I think 5 years or 6 years ago. It was pre-COVID, so it's been a while.
Right.
And none of those have been finalized yet either. So, it's not like Qatar is quick moving. This one, though, seems to have legs. I had a chance to talk to Qatar, at Aviative Africa in Windhoek in June, and while still being very cryptic about it, their vice president for Africa was basically like, no, this one has legs, and you'll see sooner rather than later, what exactly we have up our sleeve if everything works out. So I'm fairly confident they do have some plans over there. I've heard the rumors about Airlink. I spoke to Roger about it. Roger Foster being the owner, CEO, founder, MD, grand poobah, everything of Airlink. And he was typically cryptic. Roger doesn't comment on things like this,
Right.
saying that, oh, we talked about everyone. We're always open to make a deal. I could see that making sense. Roger's not getting any younger. His kids are grown, and while his daughter is a captain on the E-Jets at Airlink, I don't think she's shown an interest in taking over the business from him. So Roger's got to look at the sustainability of the post-Roger Foster era in Airlink whenever it may come, and getting an equity investment from a partner is probably a good thing. Also, Airlink lost a huge chunk of money. I think it was about 700 million rand, if I'm not mistaken, to South African Airways, which was money that was basically, well, had to be written off by Airlink in South African Airways' business rescue because SA believed that it was unsecured debt, and the courts have upheld that despite a few appeals. So as it stands right now, Airlink has written off a huge amount of cash that puts them, I wouldn't say in a precarious financial situation, but puts them in a situation where their access to capital for expansion, and expansion is a must for Airlink. They're currently flying a fleet where the largest aircraft is just 100 plus seats, 120-ish, what's the E195s, and that gives them a CASK disadvantage on trunk routes. The trunk routes like Johannesburg, Cape Town, the Golden Triangle and similar, where they're head to head with, with the 180 plus seat Sapphire aircraft, they can't compete on CASK. So if they're going to invest in a new larger narrow body fleet type, they're probably going to need to have better financial reserves to be able to introduce that and sustain that through the initial losses. Additionally, Airlink has shown an interest of investing in airlines outside of Southern Africa in a franchise model. They've done that in Namibia. I know there's interest in doing it elsewhere in Africa. So again, those kind of investments also need capital. So I think there might be a synergy there between Qatar and Airlink, given what Qatar's strategic needs are, which is to serve secondary markets in Southern Africa that they can't really put a 787 or A350 in from Doha. But at the same time, Airlink needs a capital and a partner to be able to feed long haul flights. So yeah, it could work out. I'm not saying that is exactly what's being planned, but I could see why it could make sense for both Qatar and Airlink. They're both decently run airlines nowadays.
Yeah, I remember when 700 million rand was a lot of money.
Today, it's like, a few billion here, a few billion there. Soon we're talking about real
Right.
money.
But I mean, that's probably a bit cynical, but okay. The other thing that's interesting, I totally agree with you in terms of the capacity constraint from the perspective of Airlink. Their competitors are flying 320s and 737s, but then again, that market doesn't really justify new airplanes because the pricing doesn't. There's a lot of competition now. Even the defunct SAA is trying to come back. So looking north of South Africa is clearly the way to go, but then that presupposes a bigger airplane. So I know that Embraer is very keen to get E2s into Airlink. Airlink is by far their biggest fleet operator in the African market. So Roger's facing some interesting situations. On the other hand, within the Golden Triangle, even you may make a good point though, but I think about the competition there and maybe having capacity control in terms of only 120 seats, which you can probably fill, compared to the 320, which of course Lyft is only flying in the triangle. If you look at someone like Sapphire, which is the big competitor there, only flying 737s, they have obviously a higher break-even load factor than Airlink does. So it's interesting how you juggle all this stuff from an operational standpoint. Has Airlink maxed out its fleet, or does it have to grow? Certainly, if it goes north, I think they have to grow, because you remember that Nairobi didn't work for them very well. They tried that.
I think Airlink definitely is going to keep growing. And you remember, Sapphire, I don't actually think Sapphire and Airlink are competitors as much as they really complement each other. If you look in terms of what Sapphire's strengths are, which is low CASK trunk routes, and Airlink's strengths, which are higher frequency, secondary markets for the most part. While we're talking about Golden Triangle is a tiny portion of Airlink's network. Airlink is serving 40 plus, 50 plus probably destinations all throughout the region. Everything all the way up to Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, Malawi, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Durban to Harare is just being increased, things like that. So these are routes that Sapphire can only dream of. Sapphire, when they're looking at secondary markets, like I think they've just done Johannesburg into Kruger, and the best they can do on that is twice weekly, because quite simply, a capacity of 180 seats in terms of each flight, you can't put that in on a daily basis. They've struggled a bit with some of their regional routes. I mean, certainly markets like Harare can support it, but when you look in terms of the Maputos and, the Vic Falls and Livingstons, they're going to have to consolidate some of these routes, because 180 seats simply isn't workable in the low-cost model and all routes in Africa. There are a handful of routes that can sustain this. Yes, the Golden Triangle is part of it, but I think both Airlink and Sapphire are going to need to reinvent themselves. And again, this is an interesting chat that I had with both Kirby from Sapphire, as well as Roger. In fact, we were standing on the steps at the hotel in Windhoek, and I was having this chat with both of them, and it was one of those things where you wish you had a microphone to record the candid statement.
And then, of course, if you had a microphone, no one would say anything.
Also true. But they knew I was probably going to, talk about it at some point. I don't think there's any secret there. I think they've both been open about it, that, there are constraints to their model. Sapphire, in fact, Elmar from Sapphire has been very open about the fact that while they're replacing their older 737-400s with 800s, for the most part, their fleet size is going to remain constant over the next 2 years. And, their growth is going to come through better deployment rather than just, adding more aircraft as they've been doing, for the last few years. And again, judging by what we understand has been their financial performance in recent years, they are losing money. At least that is what is being alleged as part of their ownership dispute with with the Air Services Licensing Council. So there's interesting times. I think we'll have to see how these models work out. But I'd say that if there are legs to this rumor about Qatar's involvement with Airlink, I definitely think that Airlink may be better poised to do it. I think Airlink's fundamentals are stronger than Sapphire's on a number of fronts. I think the markets that Airlink's real bread and butter, the regional stuff to and from South Africa, nobody is able to compete with them, and nobody will be able to develop the mass to compete with them. I mean, just a straight example for me, I was going from Malawi to Namibia, and the only option that got me there from Malawi to Namibia and vice versa in the same day is Airlink. Any other option required me to go via Ethiopia with overnights and, all sorts of weird and wonderful combinations. But Airlink actually offers the ability to connect between most points within Southern Africa, certainly at a premium. I mean, not cheap. $800 round trip, is for what should be a 2-hour flight each way. It was not cheap, but it's still a lot better than having to go to Addis Ababa, stay the night, and go there. It's taking me 4 days in travel rather than leave at 2 in the afternoon and be there for dinner. So I definitely see Airlink in a much stronger position, and Airlink's fundamentals are strong. They have invested in training, they've invested in maintenance, they've invested in so many other of the support structures that often are a challenge to African airlines. I don't think they're in for the long haul, and I think that's what makes them attractive as a partner for anyone such as Qatar looking to develop a footprint in secondary markets in the region. It's a tailor-made match.
One thought that that crosses my mind as I'm hearing you explain your experience. I wonder if the E175 isn't something that would be very interesting for them at Airlink for these secondary markets, because it's better than the ERJ 140s and 135s and so on.
I think it's a mix of things. Again, I'll use the Malawi market as an example because I think both being my home market as well as a market which has been a great success story for Airlink over the last year. They started Malawi in September of 2023. They flew 3 weekly to Lilongwe, 3 weekly to Blantyre on Embraer 135s. So, not a lot of capacity, 120 seats a week into each of the markets. And, that was nice and simple. What we've seen since then is that the Blantyre market has grown up to 5 weekly E135s, and that frequently is upgraded to 140s when demand, is in there. So we're talking about, up to 45 seats 5 times a week, so almost a doubling capacity. But Lilongwe has gone from 3 135s up to 4 170s a week, and that is regularly upgraded now into 190s as well, depending on the demand and the capacity. And I think that's what Airlink has. They have the ability to enter markets by literally dipping their feet into the water, then wading into the pool, and then finally, diving in and swimming all the way across, because of the ability to put anything from 35 to 120 seats into that market at reasonable step ups, depending on the demand of that market. And then, of course, you can, as you redeploy the larger aircraft into that, you have new markets that you can dip your feet into with the 135 capacity that you've freed up. So I think that is something that really works. And just from a numbers perspective, something that I saw with the Embraer 145 when we were deploying them in West Africa is that you can make a market with just 8 PPDEW, 8 passengers per day each way, work with an Embraer 135 or 145 if you deploy them right, and even less than that if you deploy it into a network. So with Airlink, literally every airport with a runway in Southern Africa, for the most part, has that much demand into the South African market. So I think potentially, if they can find a way to keep these 135s and 140s running for a while, they can start building and expanding into plenty of markets that people have not thought about, looked at, or really considered seriously, over the last many decades. So the potential is there, and I think the potential is at the bottom end of the market rather than the top end. The top end gets all the highlights, but the top end isn't really where the money is, because Johannesburg to Cape Town, what is it, $120 equivalent on average. Johannesburg to Malawi, same flight distance, in fact maybe slightly shorter to Blantyre, $300, $400 each way. Sorry, round trips. So when you're looking at that, there's a lot more money to be made in the region, and I think at a lot less risk because of a lot less competition.
Fascinating. I'm intrigued by your comment about the PDU. Where in Africa does one actually get good data on traffic? Because that has always intrigued me.
To be honest, if there is no data that's really accurate data. In fact, from what I tend to do is when I'm looking at, I use the PPDW data as relative terms. So there's some markets where I know what actual data is. There's some countries which give you relatively decent data out of them. And you look at it and you say, right, say from Accra to Lagos, I know the market size was 200,000 and MIDT is giving me 150,000. I know I should probably inflate it by, say, 20% in all markets from Ghana and Nigeria to now get a more accurate number. So I use stuff like MIDT as a basis, and then sanity check it with numbers that I know to be accurate, and then build a conversion factor market by market into that. But I think if you look in terms of MIDT data has improved significantly for Africa over the last few years. I look in terms of my 2018 MIDT relative to what I knew was reality, and some of those markets are like way off. I mean, we're talking 300, 400, 500% off from reality. And then I look at those same markets in 2023 MIDT data, and they're off by 15, 20%, which is still a significant number to be off by, if you're going to be using it for things like that. But they're coming more in line with it. And I think, it's better data modeling from MIDT, depending on the source on it. I think IATA Paxis is still a bit weak in that respect. Every Paxis data set I've had has rarely been worth the paper it's printed on. And but MIDT over the last few years, both Sabre and Amadeus source has improved significantly for Africa.
Fascinating. So we haven't spoken about anything sort of north of the equator here. Any thoughts about north of the equator that people should pay attention to? You mentioned Ethiopian briefly.
I don't think so. I think the action in Africa tends to be concentrated around the biggest markets, which are Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, and South Africa. Kenya has been relatively quiet on the aviation front, but relatively busy on every other front. A lot of drama there in recent times. I think Kenya Airways has been clear. I think this is something that's been mentioned by Alan Kilabuka multiple times. They need more lift. I think he said that they're looking for multiple wide bodies, and I think 2 wide bodies and 3 narrow bodies was what he publicly said they need. They're rejigging a network to try and free up more flying. They're deploying wide bodies into Cape Town now. They've got all their wide bodies, some of which have been grounded with engine issues and have been grounded after COVID. All of those are back now and flying. I expect to see, if they can't source, and they probably won't, it's not like you can get 787s on dry lease, easily available right now, 787-8s at that with Gen X engines. So I think we'll probably see another wet lease from them. They've got one A330 wet lease currently operating. I expect we'll probably see, assuming there's no issue with unions and the like, we'll probably see a second one come into their fleet over the winter, IATA winter season, because they they found that their JFK flight in particular really took a huge jump in profitability. Well, it allowed it to actually go into the black slightly when they hit their full code share with Delta. And the feed they're now getting out of that JFK flight, they pushed it from what was struggling at 3 times a week is now flying 9 times a week. And they expect that to continue. I think they are looking to try and push more of that from Europe. Now, it's an interesting point that the growth in Kenya, while Kenya travel is largely flat since pre-pandemic, just slightly above pre-pandemic levels, that has it's not almost entirely, it has been a significant jump in inbound travel, primarily from leisure destinations, Europe, Central Eastern Europe, Italy, Poland, places like that into Kenya have been the growth markets, while Kenya outbound traffic to traditional markets like UAE, India, China is actually down like almost 20%. So when you combine those two, I think Kenya Airways has a significant opportunity to tap into this growing tourist demand for the Kenyan market, whether that's safaris or beaches or whatever else. And to do that, they're going to need more wide body lift. So I expect to see that from Kenya Airways. Ethiopian is Ethiopian. They've got plans. They got a whole bunch of wish list destinations. I think, from a North American perspective, I expect to see Minneapolis as their next destination. I think that is something that we've always been keen on, but looking at some figures from 2023 and early 24, the growth from Minneapolis into East Africa, that's Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia, Djibouti, etc., has been significant. Again, we're talking double-digit growth from Minneapolis to those markets. A lot of it goes through Turkish Airlines and things, but a direct flight Minneapolis into Addis with good connections, immediate connections into all of these markets could be something that Ethiopian can capitalize on. So I expect to see Minneapolis probably the next North American destinations. In Europe, they've said Lisbon, Amsterdam, those are markets where they're slot constrained. Dhaka in Bangladesh is another market that Ethiopian has said they're very interested in. My sources in Ethiopian say they would have actually launched this market this summer if they'd gotten their permits in time. But I'd say that might launch in the winter via Karachi, maybe an extension on a MAX, if not a 787. So there's a lot of exciting possibilities, but nothing yet announced yet. Also, North Africa. Ethiopia has also said they're interested in North Africa. I'd say Casablanca on a MAX might be an option. They put in more capacity into Dakar and Bamako. They've added a second daily 777 flight on that route. So that's a lot of additional capacity they put in there. So lots of, small tweaks, but nothing earth-shattering in any of those markets.
Fascinating. Sean, as always, thank you for the chat.
Thank you for having me. Look forward to another one next month.
Thank you.